An explanation of Aristotle's On Interpretation, chapters 5 through 8, part 2, according to the thought of St. Thomas Aquinas. In the previous video, we saw how enunciations or propositions are divided into the one and the many, into affirmative and negative by quality, and into universal, particular, indefinite, and singular by quantity. In the present video, we'll look at how enunciations compare to truth and falsehood. We'll look at this with respect to categorical enunciations and with respect to the division of enunciation by quality and quantity. For Aristotle, and then for St. Thomas Aquinas who follows Aristotle, truth in the mind is the mind's correspondence to things. Thus, truth in enunciation occurs when an enunciation signifies of what is that it is, or of what is not that it is not. In other words, enunciations ought to reflect reality or things. Here's an example. If the reality is that the baby is sleeping, then the true enunciation will be the baby is asleep. The false enunciation will be the baby is not asleep. Notice that the true enunciation says of what is that it is. If we ignore indefinite and singular enunciations and only look at universal and particular enunciations, and moreover we also look at the difference between affirmative and negative enunciation, there are only 4 kinds of enunciation that can be considered. These are the universal affirmative, the universal negative, the particular affirmative, and the particular negative. The square of opposition is an idea developed by Aristotle in which we compare these 4 kinds of enunciations with respect to truth and falsehood. The universal affirmative enunciation is associated with the letter A. The universal negative enunciation is associated with the letter E. The particular affirmative is associated with the letter I, and the particular negative is associated with the letter O. These letters are assigned to these 4 kinds of enunciations at random. Nevertheless, you ought to remember and memorize which letter is associated with which kind of enunciation. This is important for abbreviated references later on in logic. An example of a universal affirmative is every Greek is human. Now, this enunciation happens to be true. But if it's true that every Greek is human, that entails that it's false that some Greek is not human. That's because the particular negative and the universal affirmative are contradictories. If one is true, the other is false, and likewise, if one is false, the other must be true. Both can't be true at the same time, and both can't be false at the same time. But if it's false that some Greek is not human, then it must even more so be false that no Greek is human, since that's an even bolder claim. Notice that if a particular enunciation is false, that entails the falsehood of the universal corresponding to that particular enunciation. In other words, particular enunciations of a certain quality, if false, entail the falsehood of universal enunciations of the same quality. Now, we've just said that no Greek is human is false, but that's the contradictory of the particular affirmative statement that some Greek is human. Since contradictories cannot both be false at the same time, it must be true that some Greek is human. We could also have proved this from the fact that it's true that every Greek is human. Every universal enunciation entails the particular enunciation of the same quality. In other words, if it's true that every Greek is human, then it must also be true that some Greek is human. So there were multiple ways that we could have reached the conclusion that some Greek is human. Let's look at another enunciation. Some Greek is friendly. This is true. Some Greeks are friendly. But if that's true, then it must be false that no Greek is friendly, since the universal negative is the contradictory of the particular affirmative. But if it's false that no Greek is friendly, what are we to make of the statement that some Greek is not friendly, that is, the particular negative? Well, from experience, we might be able to tell that this particular negative statement is also true, just like the particular affirmative. While some Greeks are friendly, some Greeks are not friendly. Notice that it's possible to have both a true particular affirmative and a true particular negative. But if it's true that some Greek is not friendly, that entails that the contradictory must be false, namely that every Greek is friendly. That would be the universal affirmative. Let's look at a third enunciation. No Greek is Martian. This is obviously true. But if the universal negative is true, that entails that the particular affirmative must be false. So it's false that some Greek is Martian. Now also notice, as we said before, that the universal of a certain quality always entails the truthfulness of the particular of the same quality if the universal is true. So since the universal negative is true, it follows that the particular negative must also be true, namely some Greek is not a Martian. If no Greek is Martian, then some Greek is not a Martian. But since the particular negative is true, and that's the contradictory of the universal affirmative, then it's false that every Greek is Martian. Notice that both universal propositions cannot be true at the same time. These are contraries. They're contraries because they're as far apart from one another as is possible. They can both be false at the same time, but they can't both be true. It's important not to confuse contraries with contradictories. The universal negative and the particular affirmative are contradictory. The universal affirmative and the particular negative are also contradictory. But the universal affirmative and the universal negative are contraries. Now, the particular affirmative and the particular negative are called subcontraries. These can both be true at the same time, as we saw with some Greek is friendly and some Greek is not friendly. Now, the particular enunciations relate to the universal enunciations of the same quality as subalternated to them. If the particular is false, then the universal is also false, since the universal makes an even bolder claim. But it's not the case that if the particular is true, the universal must be true. We can't reason from some Greek is friendly to all Greeks are friendly. But if the universal is true, then the particular must be true, since the universal, once again, makes a bolder claim than the particular. Here are some general rules we have deduced from the square of opposition. First, one of every pair of contradictories must be true, and the other must be false. If one pair of contraries is true, the other must be false. But both of a pair of contraries might happen to be false simultaneously. Both of a pair of subcontraries might be true simultaneously. If a universal is true, the particular subalternated to it is also true. The letters associated with the 4 kinds of enunciations are important to memorize, as we said. The universal affirmative is associated with the letter A, usually as a lowercase, but sometimes as a capitalized A. The universal negative is associated with E. The particular affirmative is associated with I, and the particular negative is associated with O. Although these letters are arbitrarily assigned to the 4 kinds of enunciation, it is crucial that you memorize these letters, since we'll be using them in abbreviations later on. In summary, in the last video, we divided enunciations into the one and many, that is, into categorical and composite enunciations. And we also divided enunciations by quality into affirmative and negative, as well as by quantity into universal, particular, indefinite, and singular. In the present video, we looked at enunciations, which are categorical, and divided them by quality and quantity, ignoring indefinite and singular quantity. So only looking at affirmative, negative, universal, and particular enunciations. And then looking at those 4 kinds of enunciations, we compared them with respect to truth and falsehood. Later on in On Interpretation, St. Thomas and Aristotle, who he's commenting on, will look at tense and the matter of enunciations, but we won't do that in this video.